So welcome everyone, and namaste. Thank you for joining our interactive workshop today on digital humanities and intelligent futures, which comes at a moment when the entire world is going through an intense period of technological, social, economic, and geopolitical change in which digital technologies are simultaneously objects of aspiration, of implementation, of opportunity, and in some cases concern. And that's the case for India, with its vast Digital India program of transformation, and for Australia, which is also investing deeply in e-governance, in new infrastructures, in startups and the digital economy. Now, as a meta technology, figured not only in multiple transformations of everyday life, but also in the very aspiration and imagination of emerging digital societies. There are many pressing areas that require interdisciplinary expertise, which the body that gathers today represents. That's expertise across the breadth of the humanities and social sciences, business and law, and with colleagues in technology, engineering, and science. But despite the evident differences between our two countries, there are many areas of common concern and of complementary expertise where we are hoping to develop fruitful dialogues, collaborations, and ultimately joint efforts in order to ensure effective and humane digital solutions for our peoples and for the world as a whole. And I think that's a key motivation and a key contribution coming from the humanities. And of course, Australia and India share many common concerns today about the security and the sovereignty of our digital systems, and so have a common interest in fostering effective national and multilateral regimes of regulation for the digital age. Both countries also face significant challenges of scale in implementing robust infrastructures and ensuring equality of access, especially those that will allow us to overcome the digital divides that persist in both countries, and I'm sure are very much on the mind of all of us in our work. Of course, in both India and Australia, rural communities and digital enhancements in the agricultural sectors are areas of significant effort. And in planning for the urban environments of the future, our cityscapes are also sites where automation is becoming a central feature of everyday life. And it's striking just how fast those developments are proceeding. And in the age of media platforms and expanding e-commerce, digital transactions, of course, is an area that I've been deeply invested across. We can see that the digital economy is reconfiguring our patterns and habits of consumption, changing the nature and organization of livelihoods, reordering sociability and the public sphere in very profound ways. And the futures of our education sectors are also infused with the possibilities and challenges of digital algorithms, with all of these domains contending with the rapid implementation of large language models and generative AI applications. So our gathering at this webinar today is intended to initiate and extend our mutual engagement with both the opportunities and challenges posed by intelligent futures that are now an imminent presence in our societies. And of course, India and Australia are both countries that place central importance, quite rightly, on the contributions of the humanities to addressing the impact and significance of such widespread and rapid social change. So today, I hope, will be an opportunity to engage with colleagues who can share key insights on the breadth and depth of digital practices in both countries, firmly situated in the material and cultural contexts where digital transformations become meaningful, and also allow us to take a long-term view of the pathways that have led us towards the present nexus of digital technologies. The potentials that these technologies offer us for fairer and more sustainable societies, as well as some of the guardrails that may need to be put in place to ensure the futures that both countries want to see. So I wanted to thank you all once more for joining us over these 2 days and for taking our conversation forward, for bringing all your expertise and for sharing your time. I especially want to thank all of our speakers for this webinar. These are outstanding scholars with very active roles in shaping the intelligent futures that concern us here. And I also want to thank Professor Brianna, and the Australia-India Institute for their foresight in developing this bilateral forum over the past few years, and Australia's Department of Education, who have enabled us to provide some seed funding for initiatives in this domain. And with that, I'd like to hand over briefly to Professor Rangan, Principal Consultant for Government Projects at the Australia-India Institute, who will give us some of the background in the development of the forum.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I'm speaking today to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and I also pay my respects to all the elders, Indigenous elders of the people of the places where all our participants are in. It's wonderful to be moderating this workshop, and I mean to introduce this session, and I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's input on this exciting topic. It's wonderful to be partnering with the Centre for Digital Futures, a School of Communication and Arts at the University of Queensland, on this workshop. As Adrian has mentioned, as the world becomes intensely digital, understanding and harnessing the power of technology and how it works in relation to questions that people deal with in the humanities is very critical. And this workshop, we hope, will provide everyone the opportunity to explore this exciting domain and uncover the possibilities that it offers. Just a bit of a background regarding these collaboration workshops. Today's workshop is part of a series which is designed to bring together stakeholders from academia, government, industry in both Australia and India. They sort of are seen as a platform for experts to connect, share insights, and lay the groundwork for collaborative research endeavors. So these workshops have emerged from topics that were highlighted during the 5th Australia-India Education Council meeting in 2019, when the ministers of both countries agreed to deepen institutional partnerships and research collaborations in interdisciplinary areas of emerging importance. And in the past year, we've successfully conducted 2 of these workshops, one on water, soil, and food security in partnership with the University of Sydney and the Australia-India Water Centre, and the second on the future of healthcare in collaboration with the University of Melbourne and the Indian Institute of Public Health in Hyderabad. And this present workshop, which we're doing with the University of Queensland, is the Centre of Digital Futures, is the 3rd one, and we're hoping to hold the next one on environmental change and energy frontiers next year. We are looking at this particular field because Australia and India, as Adrian has said, have made significant advances in different aspects of digital and AI technologies. The rapid expansion of information and communication technologies, digital data sets, innovations in machine learning have opened new areas of research at the intersection of computing, humanities and the social sciences. The increasing use of AI is transforming the meanings of learning, work, well-being, social interaction, geopolitics, and the environment. And we're looking forward to this workshop offering a wide scope for exploring innovative, collaborative, interdisciplinary research that addresses shared interests and concerns in both countries. I'd like to express our gratitude to the Australian Government Department of Education for their support of this workshop. This workshop is also part of the Institute's broader program of work enhancing the bilateral education relationship. We deeply appreciate the department's support, which enables the Institute to play a critical role in strengthening the learning, skilling, and research engagement between our two countries. So in conclusion, I extend my thanks to the University of Queensland and in particular, Adrian. Thank you for your leadership in making this workshop a reality. And I look forward to listening to all of your contributions. I'll pass it back to you, Adrian. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. And I want to join you also in recognising the traditional custodians of our land, and recognising elders past, present and future, and their contributions to Australian society and to global society. I'm also now, in getting us going, I'm very, very pleased and honoured to be able to welcome distinguished Professor Julian Thomas, who is the Director of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society. Julian has had a long-standing impact on the field of media and communications in Australia, broadening, the depth of the questions we look at and really preparing the ground for us for an era in which the work that we do touches upon so many other domains and so many areas and aspects of life. And over the course of that work, Julian has written widely about digital inclusion, which is so critical for both of our countries, about automation and technologies such as Wi-Fi, of course, and the work on the Australian Digital Inclusion Index, which has run over a number of years and really is the kind of central kind of knowledge. Work on internet on the outstation and on work on remote Aboriginal communities has been really, really important in making the key arguments we need to make sure that the benefits of the digital are properly extended and respectfully structured in ways that work for all regions and all peoples in Australia. And Julian is joining us today, as I say, very much in demand everywhere, and so in a very busy schedule. So we're very grateful he's been able to make time for us to speak about society in the loop, observability, and the digital humanities for automation and AI. So thank you once more, Professor, and may I hand over the digital podium to you now. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Adrian. I hope everyone can hear me. And thank you for those very kind words. I'm really delighted to be able to join you for the workshop. Such an interesting and important set of questions as you laid out. So sincere thanks to you and Priya and the Institute for the opportunity to talk a little bit about our approach to these problems in our ARC Centre for Automated Decision Making in Society, as you mentioned, the research centre, which I am the director of at the moment. Now, I'm going to share some slides, if that's okay. So let me just do that, and please let me know if you can't see them. I'll do my best to get them up there. Right, we're halfway through them. Sorry, I'm going to take us right back to the beginning. Here we are. Can everybody see them? And you can hear me. Thank you. Yeah. So I should also say You said I was busy. I would very much like to have more time to participate in the discussions you're having, and so apologies for not being able to stay longer. I also wanted to start, of course, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we work in our centre across Australia. And I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, Naarm, the traditional owners of the Wurundjeri people, as Priya said, the Wurrung and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nations, and want to pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I've included on this slide, I think, a painting which we have used and thought about quite a bit in our centre, the work of Triona Ham, a painting called Information Retrieval on Country, which is her reflection about her engagement with search engines and her thinking about the relationship between the kinds of knowledges and information produced by search engines and the sort of indigenous knowledges that are most closely linked to her country. Something we've been thinking about a lot in our centre. So the blue squares, those fuzzy blue shapes in that image, actually represent data overlaid onto the people and the landscape of the Eastern Kulin Nations. Okay, so what did I guess I wanted to take up some of the questions that Adrian's raised, and the challenge of the idea of intelligent futures and where the humanities might go in terms of engaging with them. So I wanted to share with you, I suppose, what I guess is one of the sort of central premises of our research in this space, which does very much come from a humanities and social science perspective. So we have come to the question of digital futures and intelligent futures via, I suppose, a bit of history, actually, which is where my original academic training is, in thinking about the long history of automation and the complex relationships between humans and machines. And I suppose our idea was that looking at what we are living through now with the emergence of the kinds of digital transformations that Adrian and Priya were talking about was actually something rather new, a new kind or new mode of automation, speaking in general terms, of course. So if we think about the sorts of modes of automation, the kinds of machines we associate with the classical era of industrialization and really the first extraordinary phase of social science and philosophical thinking about automation going back to the 18th century, this was all about machines that were taking over the work of people and animals in terms of making things. So what we see now, which is, I think, a striking and important development, I say now, it's been going on for a while, but it's gathering pace, is the extraordinary proliferation of machines which are not just making things, but they're also making decisions. And this, I think, is a new kind of automation where in the past decisions were made by humans or through institutions. They're now being automated. And on that slide there, you can see a few examples of the kinds of decisions that automated systems are making for us in everyday life, from how we navigate from one part of the city to another, to the kinds of music that we might be listening to, our interactions with government. There's a few screenshots there from our Australian social security app provided by the Australian government, which very much controls the way in which people interact with government in order to receive social benefits and welfare. And also in health, and using the example there of the Google search engine and the way in which that shapes people's access to critical information. So this, we think, is something new. What makes it possible, of course, is the big data that our digital economy and digital social interactions now produce, the ubiquitous mobile connectivity, which many of us have, which generate, for example, data about where we are and what we might be doing. Of course, artificial intelligence and machine learning, which enables decision-making systems to draw on large volumes of that data and make predictions accordingly. And the big digital platforms, of course, which have the resources to bring all that together in cloud computing and huge data centers. So I suppose one thing we think is particularly significant, and I guess I've already hinted at this, but one thing that we think is really important, especially thinking about this from a human or social perspective, is that the kinds of debates that we're having about automation now and the sorts of digital futures we might look forward to have extended beyond those questions which we probably associate especially with the first wave of automation, which is the way in which machines are taking over the work of human beings, and with serious consequences, of course, for human communities and people everywhere when people lose their jobs because of automation. But I suppose so we're seeing all that, of course, now, but we're also seeing something else, which is machines taking over the work of institutions, whether they're government bodies or indeed corporations with sets of policies or rules, or professional ethics or norms. So taking over that broad category of institutional controls. And from our point of view, that kind of automation then raises very critical issues of human oversight and control, which demand new kinds of analysis and investigation. We think that these demand a new kind of work which crosses the boundaries between the humanities, the social sciences, and the technological disciplines. So just to tell you a little bit then about our research centre, which was established in 2020 to address this new kind of automation. And you see there, I've set out our centre's mission as it appears on our website. And the first thing you'll see, of course, is that it's a complicated, multifaceted set of objectives for our centre. Really, so we're aiming to connect academic researchers with those in industry, government, and the community to develop responsible, ethical, and inclusive automated decision-making systems for the benefit of all Australians. So just to unpack that a tiny bit, in order to explain it, I don't want that to seem too cryptic. The centre is about making connections across sectors because we think that the sorts of problems that are raised by the kind of automated systems we're talking about can't be solved by any particular sector. They really need government, researchers, and the corporate sector and the not-for-profit sector to work together. We think that the sort of mode of automation that we're talking about now requires responsible, ethical, and inclusive solutions. So that means strategies, that means modes of automation where we are aware of and conscious of what their consequences may be. In just the same way, when we develop land in a way which affects the environment, we're required to develop an analysis of what impact our changes will have on the environment. We think it's just as important in this area of the digital economy and society that what we or corporations or governments do is also informed by an understanding of the likely consequences. We believe these sorts of new modes of automation also need to be framed in ethical ways. They need to be governed by rules, and they need to be inclusive. They need to be for the benefit of everybody. So we're aiming to do that, to enhance public understanding of these systems, which really are proliferating everywhere, inform public debate, and help train a new generation of researchers and practitioners for this challenge. And those people we see very much as not only academics or researchers working in research institutions, but also likely to be people working in government, the not-for-profit sector, and of course in business. We see these new automated systems as socio-technical in our sense. So we see them not as purely technological phenomena, not as things which are simply driven by technology or technological advances, but we see them as the result of interactions between the people who design them, who shape them, who often do a good deal of the work to generate the data sets that, for example, machine learning systems learn from. So the interactions of people, data sets also generated by technological systems and peoples. Institutions, as I've said, so governments or corporations or digital platforms which may develop and design these systems, and the machines themselves. So all of those things work together to create the kinds of systems that we're now seeing. You'll notice that we talk about automated decision making, probably a bit more than we talk about AI as such. And that's because the kind of automation we're talking about, while it's now primarily driven by the advances in machine learning and now generative AI that we're familiar with, are not all associated with AI. Many of them are designed and built around other kinds of digital technologies. So just to tell you a tiny bit about the centre, it is a large centre in Australian terms, and for a centre which is primarily based in the humanities and the social sciences. It comprises 280 researchers from across 9 Australian universities. It's based at my institution, which is RMIT here in Melbourne, and it includes a network of industry partners and international research organisations. And there's a fair bit of information about what we're doing on our website if you're interested in taking a look at that. This complicated diagram, I apologise for, but it shows you broadly how the research program works, bringing people from a range of disciplines to look at those different strands of automation, the ones I mentioned, data, machines, institutions, and people, in order to develop new models for better practice, to reduce the risks of automation and encourage better outcomes. You'll notice that we have a set of focus areas: news and media, transport and mobilities, health and social services. That's because we think that the forms of automation and the new technologies we're interested in are really best understood in the context of particular sectors and industries, and that we have a lot to learn from understanding how they have developed in some of those spaces. And that includes drawing lessons from some of those to others. This whole area has become rather, as we would say, siloized. It's, a lot of the expertise is become very specific to particular areas like health or digital media. And so we try to break through those kinds of boundaries as well as the institutional ones. But the significant thing, I think, to say is that our centre is unusual as a large centre working in this area of AI and automation, which really is primarily based in the humanities and in the social sciences. So let me come to the core problem or the critical issue that I thought I would say a little bit about, and I think gives you a bit of a sense of the range of work that we do and the range of work, the questions that we think are particularly important if we're approaching these systems from the perspective of the humanities. And this is the question of observability, because we see that as critical, not only in terms of our capacity as humanities and social science scholars to understand automation better than we actually do. We need to be able to see what they are doing, what these systems are doing. We need to understand what they are doing. So observability is critical for that analytic objective, but it's also vital for that broader normative aim of improving public interest outcomes, of getting better results, so that our intelligent futures really do work for everybody. Observability is not a simple or straightforward matter. You'll probably all be aware that in all of the debates around how we regulate AI and so forth, we talk a lot about transparency and intelligibility, explainability, all of those kinds of features of technical systems. But we know that observability is rather more complicated than that. It is not just a matter of having a human overseeing or checking off the results of automated systems. It goes far more than that. It really is about our capacity to study these systems. It's not sufficient to answer all of our demands that we need to make of them, but it is critically important if we are going to assess them, if we're going to measure what they do, if we're going to evaluate them, if we're going to regulate them, if we are going to have human and social oversight over them. So that is what is critical for human agency, I think, in this space. That is what has been very difficult to achieve. That is what we have been working on. And we see it as both a research question and what I might call a kind of policy question. I really don't think we will get better outcomes from AI or automation unless we have a degree of independent observability. So observability from outside the platforms themselves or outside government, if we're talking about government services. So there are some critical questions that we can ask about these services. You know, to what degree can we ensure, if we have observability, can we ensure that our intelligent futures will be inclusive? To what extent can we have agency over and oversight over the new digital services? What questions can and should we be able to ask of them, and what questions should they answer? So let me just and I will try and move through these pretty quickly if you don't mind, but I thought I'd just to give you a flavour of the sort of work and why we think this question of observability and the related capabilities is so important, is I thought I'd have a look at three of our areas of work. One around the digital inequality issues, which Adrian's already mentioned. One around the observability of the media system, and especially advertising, and one about what we think we need to do next in our disciplines in order to scale up to meet the challenge of intelligent futures. So let me just sort of say a little bit quickly about a project of ours, which is about how we map and act upon digital inequalities in remote First Nations communities in Australia. And what is driving our work here is what is really a very significant agreement between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations in Australia and Australian governments at the national and at the state level. And this is what we call the Closing the Gap framework in the Australian context. And it has a number of critical outcomes. One of them is particularly important for the subject of the workshop today. This is what they call Closing the Gap Outcome 17. And you can see that it is about the imperative that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have access to information and services that enable them to make informed decisions about their own lives. So that is all about digital inclusion and their capacity to participate in the digital economy as they wish to do so, and to take advantage of the benefits of digital inclusion to the degree that they wish to do so. So this is what has framed our work, because when we saw that was there, we were aware that while this was a very important objective and one which is critical for the achievement of other critical goals in areas like health and education, there was no, at the time we started this work, there was no way of measuring progress towards it. So we did develop a research agenda in this space, developing formal partnerships with local First Nations organisations, to support the research and the engagement in about 12 communities across Australia. We've been working with community co-researchers, employing them, and collaborating, of course, also with government agencies, industry, and a range of First Nations organisations. And the idea, of course, is that we return the data that we generate to the community, and that we work with the communities where we're working on the development of local digital inclusion plans and resource toolkits. So I'll just skip right to that. We've been doing this now for a few years, and we've started to get some sense of what we think is likely to be required in these communities if our intelligent futures are going to work for these communities and are going to include them in terms of the design and the priorities. So some of this is about how services are designed and paid for to make sure that they're affordable for low-income communities. Some of it is about making sure that the infrastructure. Sorry, just hearing a bit of background. Yeah, so some of it is about making sure the infrastructure is appropriate. Some of it is about making sure that that digital networks at a community level are designed in a way that gives the community some control over how they work. So, for example, there is a preference for Wi-Fi services in many remote communities because these can be turned off at night. I'll just move fairly quickly through. I know that we haven't got a lot more time, so I'll tell you a little bit about our work on advertising. This is important because the digital economy is very much driven by advertising, but there is, as you probably know, no visibility of advertising on digital platforms, no observability. How do we find out? So in the era of television and radio, in the era of billboard advertising, which of course we are still in our cities, we can see what's being advertised. But this is not the case on platforms like Facebook or others. And of course, advertising is and should be a regulated sort of set of industry. So, for example, in Australia, advertising alcohol on free-to-air on television is not done. Is illegal. But of course, we know that this happens in what we would call dark ads on digital platforms. So this project is about working with citizen scientists, as we call them, volunteers who use a plugin in their browser to download the ads that they view, and that enables us to pull all those ads together into an observatory where we can see what people are actually seeing. So we started this project back in 2021. Since then, as you can see, we've had almost 2,000 participants and built up a substantial database of ads. Now, this is actually very useful for a whole range of reasons. You can use it to understand how, for example, advertisers are making environmental claims. You can see the targeting of particular users in advertising for gambling, for alcohol, or for unhealthy foods. And you can see also how the platforms are explaining the kinds of ads that they see. I guess that's an example of the sorts of challenges of observability we see in the automated area. The future work we have to do in this space needs to go beyond just capturing what people see on a desktop browser to seeing what they find when they use their mobile devices, and the kind of sequencing of advertising. Also, of course, the emergence of generative AI, which is developing new ads tailored for individuals every time you click on a link. So advertising is absolutely essential to the digital economy, but it's something we don't see and don't know much about. This brings me to really the last example I wanted to use, but This is actually something different. It's really a plan for how we can go forward in our disciplines in terms of better understanding what's happening in the digital economy, recognizing the problems of observability and the need for new methods like the data donation methods we've used working with users to generate information about ads, understanding that that's probably some of the ways in which we're going to be working more in future. As we all know, the big digital platforms themselves are making it increasingly difficult for researchers from all disciplines to get access to critical information about how people are using it. So this new environment does present huge challenges for researchers right across the disciplines, but especially in key areas of the humanities and social sciences. It really needs a new set of tools, new set of skills, and certainly sort of, a new generation of data governance in order to deal with this. So what we're trying to do in our centre is work with another ARC centre in Australia, the Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child, which looks at children's experience of digital life, in order to build an ongoing set of capabilities and skills that can enable people to do the kind of work we've started to do, but at much less cost. So we're not reinventing the wheel every time we try to figure out what's going on a digital platform. The proposed, so we're calling this ASDO, or Australian Social Data Observatory, and it's I won't explain this in detail, but these are the critical elements of it. And we expect this new data observatory, which will include absolutely a whole range of data and information about people's interactions with digital platforms across a whole range of areas. So not just advertising, but also key information around, for example, the digital inclusion issues and other things like that I've been talking about, into a well-supported research facility that everybody can use, and we hope people from outside universities as well as within them. So I hope that gives you a good sense of the range of work we're doing and where we see this going. I do think that observability is a critical problem for us all as humanities and social science scholars addressing the challenges of intelligent futures. But I think there are some ways in which we're figuring out how to do it. And we think that we can get quite a bit further with these issues by working, and the way in which we do that is by working with communities, bringing society into the loop, as I said in the title, bringing community organisations, working with government and the private sector, and of course across our disciplines, in order to get an integrated understanding of these issues. So thanks very much, and I hope that's useful for your discussions.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was a really, really compelling and interesting oversight, not just of the issues that we face in Australia and the people that we're trying to help, but also kind of really practical ways about thinking about how we deal with the systemic implications of, data abundance that we often can't see or can't access. And when we can access it, how can we actually harness it into a set of mechanisms that allow, for the kind of considered and human approaches that we want to take, forward. So this kind of question of legibility, which I think in the Indian context, of course, there's Aadhaar, there's the world's biggest biometric program, which makes people legible in an incredible scale that's never been achieved. But then access to that data, is actually, very uneven in terms of who's able to find that data and use it usefully. Protection of that data is an issue. And of course, in India, where, Alphabet and Meta own 90% of the advertising market, which runs through WhatsApp on a huge scale, all those kind of questions about dark flows and what to do about them are very, very much live issues. So I think this kind of really sort of demonstrates how to think kind of systematically about such a huge kind of problem for everybody to solve. Now, I think we have sort of 10 minutes, and perhaps we can have some questions for Julian before he leaves. Can I ask everybody to put their questions into chat in the first instance, and I will try and either I can pick some out from the chat box, unless you'd like to pick up on some yourself, Julian. So I can see there's one in here which is about, has any work been done with digital inclusion and exclusion with humanitarian entrance to Australia? So people who are coming into Australia on humanitarian visas, some of the most vulnerable populations, how can we help them in terms of getting to grips with the digital systems they'd have to learn to navigate to be part of Australian life, and the sort of risks that are also kind of inherent to this environment?
Absolutely great question. And as you say, people in those circumstances are extraordinarily vulnerable and face a serious set of challenges. We've been doing some work with the Red Cross, which is a partner organisation in our centre, about how we could do this work. We haven't done it ourselves yet. They have done some initial studies, and there is some work around, but very little that really does more than scratch the surface in terms of the Australian context. So thanks enormously for the question. And I think you're pointing to an area of work where much more is going to be required.
Thank you. So please, does anybody have their hand up? Or if you could type,
I can see, Adrian, I can see a question from Vinesh.
Yes.
How do Indian researchers become?
Sorry, can you mute, please? Thank you. Go on, Julie.
Okay, yeah, no, just how do Indian researchers become part of the ARC centres? So, I mean, I'll get down to specifics of our centre, but there are a number of ARC centres in Australia, and they do have, I mean, I think this is important, they do have, all of them have international partner research organisations. So it's possible for them to enter into collaborative arrangements with research organisations, and indeed with other kinds of organisations outside Australia and in India. That is very possible to do so, and of course we are very interested in collaborating with organisations and researchers in India. I encourage people to get in touch with me if you'd like to talk about the work you're interested in doing, and I'd love to follow that up.
Thank you.
So I'm a little shy. I mean, I have lots of kind of questions around the legibility and the benefits of legibility, and trying to think about what connects to India, and not just in a very literal way. I mean, I think it's also, as I say to my students when I talk about Indigenous digital cultures, it's important to remember there are Indigenous people everywhere in the world. And so there are many groups in India, Adivasi groups and others, who are also, contending, with systems designed for their benefit, but not designed necessarily with their knowledge. And how can you actually kind of include people in ways that speak to the needs of that community, and which are empowering, and not just a kind of another sort of bureaucratic layer, which is a common legacy for both countries, of course. And how can you have a policy which kind of works against the urge to bureaucracy, because of the burdens of legibility and the cost of maintaining access and compliance with these kind of systems, can be very heavy.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's just a really important and very challenging area. I think I'm sure that in Australia we can learn quite a bit from some of the initiatives and ideas around how that can be achieved in the Indian context. As you said, the Indian context is is rather different, because in fact in India we have a far more advanced and integrated digital social service or government information system than we do in Australia. We talk about the Indian stack, of course, and that is something we do not have here, but we do also have in India, as we have here, as you said, the dominance of a small number of digital platforms, which really do virtually monopolize a great deal of communication, both at the community level in terms of media, news and information, and at the private level. And this is a whole domain which is very obscure, not only to researchers, but also, of course, to the users of these systems themselves, and to those civil society organisations, which are also well developed in India as well, I should say, that have an interest. So clearly, in India, there are well-developed arguments around, for example, the privacy questions, around the and of course around the regulation and moderation of content on those digital platforms. How do we get at those questions as researchers? We think that perhaps just about the only way may be to work with people who use those platforms. So find ways where they can share the data that is generated through their interactions with those systems in a way which respects their privacy and preserves that, but enables us to develop a larger picture of what might be going on. So we're not just relying on, for example, on the digital platforms to tell us how well or not they're doing. We've got some independent view of that problem, so I suppose I think this is a really challenging problem for us as researchers. There is, it's very complex, but it's something we need to work on for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah. There's a question here from Professor Ranger, who says, are there any initiatives as part of your of the ADMS Centre's activities to develop cross-disciplinary courses at the master's level on these terrains? Because you talked about upskilling the future generation.
Yes, that's right. So, and thanks, Priya. Yes, so absolutely. So we're working on developing some graduate programs. We already do have some running, as we're a multi-university centre. So, of course, we have to work through our institutions to get academic programs like master's degrees happening. But we have made some progress on this, and I know. So, for example, in our QT, which is a participating institution, we've set up a master's program in this space, which has just commenced, and we've got some others happening. We're also running summer schools for graduate students, including coursework students from all over Australia every year, and people from overseas as well. So we'd really welcome if people know of any students who might be interested in participating in those. So that's where our students spend a week with our researchers and industry partners and others, working on specific problems and methods and tools, and also getting the chance to talk about their own work. Really encourage you to let people know about that if you think they may be interested in, and I can provide more information if people want that.
So that takes me to a final question, if you don't mind, Julian. I know you're pressed for time, but in both countries, of course, we have our eyes, fixed on the big transnational platforms, the platform giants, and how to manage them. India has clout because the sheer number of users, the importance of that data to those companies is very significant, and so issues around sovereignty and control and sort of bilateral relationship. Australia, of course, has a different situation, but has kind of been a leader in regulating those platforms. But I think in terms of engaging with industry and working with industry on these very questions, rather than figuring it, industry as a, inexhaustible, a user and abuser of data, but actually engaging with them to make progress in the areas. How has that experience been?
I think it's been really interesting, actually, Adrian. I mean, I've got a sort of strong view, I suppose, that, unlike, some of our colleagues would not support working with industry. There's a view that the big tech companies in particular, have a particular set of interests which, to some people's minds, are inconsistent with a independent research approach. I suppose our view has been that the complexity of this landscape is such that it is not really possible to do it from a great height. And we have to work in this space with those organisations which are running these services and doing those things in a way, of course, which doesn't prevent us from reaching our own conclusions about the consequences or ramifications of how particular services might be working, or what the problems might be in terms of data discrimination or bias or other things. We must be able to do that. But I suppose I have always thought that there is a great deal to be gained from keeping channels of communication open with technology companies. And that has certainly assisted us in understanding better the kinds of systems that we work with. So, for example, I mean, I could give you quite a few examples, but in that area of digital inequality and remote communities, if we did not work or talk to the big telecommunications companies that provide critical digital infrastructure in those areas, we would not know what is feasible or possible, or what indeed are the obstacles to getting better results in those areas. We haven't really got everything we've asked for when we've talked to those companies, but we have understood a bit better why the problems are the way they are. And I think we've been able to exercise some influence in their thinking about what they could do differently. So that's one area. I mean, in terms of thinking about, say, the problems of bias in search engines, which are so significant because they're used all the time, and they're a critical source of information for people about really important things like health information, the example that I gave. So better understanding how search engines work, how they design this, how and why they design systems in the way they do, is really significant. It's got to be backed up by independent evaluation and analysis. And we think we can do that through that data donation method and some other approaches. But I mean, Google's never going to tell us what their search algorithm actually is, but by talking to them, or by people in Microsoft or elsewhere where people also run search engines, we can get a much better understanding of how they work and why we see some of the strange things we sometimes see, what they're trying to achieve. And I mean, for us, that's really, really informative. So yeah, it's a complicated problem, but I guess my sense is that, as I say, this is not work that we can do from an ivory tower. It's not work that we can do from a great distance. We need to talk to people if we can, work with them where possible, and also then do that to the degree that we can, also do that independent analysis and evaluation.
That's really kind of helpful. I think my sense of it in those kind of encounters is that actually, these companies also need some assistance. I mean, if you're going to operate in India on such a vast scale, how would you understand the consequences of what you're doing if you can't understand India? How can anybody understand India? It's so vast. If you don't have the kind of input from people like who are gathered here today. The same applies to Australia, to be able to kind of have input into the ways those platforms are managed and then get better outcomes. It's really impossible to expect engineers to be able to work this out a priori, without the kind of input of this work. So, in that sense, I think the work that I want to thank Professor Thomas now for his talk, but also to mention that the work that's being done here is exactly the kind of work that's going to influence the development of the next generation of algorithms and automated decision-making systems. So you can see directly, how this kind of very pragmatic and humane approach can put knowledge out there, which can then be kind of taken into consideration in the design of those systems that will shape our intelligent futures. So it's a perfect case study, I think, in how you get yourself on a platform where you can actually start to make a difference in the design of these things. So I'd like to thank Julian for his talk, and of course him and all his colleagues for their work.
Thank you, Adrian, and thanks, Priya. I'm really pleased to have the chance to talk and have a great workshop.
So one round of digital clapping, please, for Professor Thomas.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for your questions. Bye for now.
We're going to move on directly into the next section, and I'm going to ask my very good colleague, Professor Vikneswara Ilavarasan from IIT Delhi, who's going to kind of lead us through a discussion around comparable issues. As in all of the sessions over these 2 days, we're sort of pairing views from Australia, things that are happening in India, with discussions from the other side. So when we start to think about the issues that are raised around automated decision-making, algorithms, AI and governance and platforms, the things that Julian's introduced, what are the kind of comparable issues and terrain in India that we should be thinking of? So we have, in that sense, been very fortunate to have Vignesh, my good friend, here as the Abdulaziz Al-Sagar Chair Professor of the Department of Management Studies, IIT Delhi, who has done extensive research on the interaction of ICTs and social change, whether that's across the introduction of digital payments, across many sectors, across all those big changes in India. And so he's going to guide us through what I hope will be an interactive discussion. So feel free to make use of the chat board or to raise your hand as we start to think about the comparable issues in India in this terrain. So please lead us forward, Vignesh.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adrian. Thank you very much for this invitation. And I'm a little tensed whether I'll be able to meet the expectations of the group here. And maybe 20% of what Professor Julian did, I'll try to do it. So what I do is I will, the next 30 minutes, for 5 or 7 minutes, I will lay out a plan for what are the possible areas we can do work on it. And after that, we can open up for the discussions. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Right. My screen is visible. All right. So what I do now is trying to compare certain issues that can be covered by researchers in India and Australia. So I have a single. Just a minute. Meena, could you please mute yourself, Meena? Yeah, thank you. Okay, when we are talking about what are the potential areas we can work on, right? I can broadly divide them into 2 axes. So one is the nature of the technologies. When we are looking at the technologies, broadly into 3 areas. One is adoption. For what are the reasons people end up picking up a particular technology, or organizations look at a particular technology? How do they really use it? And when they use it, what is the level of impact? All right. And the other axis, looking at who are the people who are using it, whether we are talking about individuals in terms of micro level, or meso level when we are talking about organizations, or we are talking about, say, for example, macro level, the policy level or the governance level. Okay, taking the case of, say, for example, artificial intelligence or the digital platforms. As an individual, why do I use it? Or as a gig economy platform worker, why do I really use it? That will become a part of the micro. How I'm really using it, whether I'm switching it off at say 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock, or I'm keeping it for nearly 14 hours a day or something. That will be talking about the use. When I'm doing it, what is the impact that is really happening, right? What is happening to my lives? So that is if we are looking at the individual level, both from the user perspective and the service provider perspective. MISO can be looking at from the perspective of the organizations. As a company like say Uber, Ola, or an urban company in India, how are they really using it, right? Are they really using it for providing employment opportunities, or it's just into simple revenue generation? Or in terms of want to control people? One of the recent findings from a PhD student says that, okay, urban company or the delivery boy, the riders, the delivery boys are not allowed to stand in a group. So whenever 3 delivery boys come together, the platform sends a trigger to them saying that you need to disperse yourself. So one of the arguments is basically telling people, saying that we don't want some kind of unionization, people coming to forming collective mobility initiatives. So those kind of arguments are being built. If you're going to look at it, this from the MISO perspective. Macro perspective is looking from the government. We are looking at a pan-India rollout of similar systems. So what is the role played by the regulators? So if you pick up any issues, we are talking about, right, looking at a particular technology, then looking at what is the level it is having, we can discuss this. So if I expand on this a little bit more, okay, broadly as a researcher, or when we are looking at a collaborative research, we are talking about picking up a particular technology. Okay, I'm coming from a different discipline, sociology, then moved into a business school, and I use different sets of theories and different set of disciplinary approaches. And next one is looking at the methods, whether we are looking at any conventional methods, or when I work in an interdisciplinary department like this, people end up doing a lot of big data related work. All right. So one is looking at nature of the technologies, and the next one is looking at which discipline you're coming from, or what are the different theories you're likely to use, and what are the kind of different methods. So if I start thinking of possible directions we can take, so one is if I take generative AI, now there are a lot of people are looking at, even in my own department, we started looking at whether generative AI is resulting in a different occupational structure in programming industry in India and Australia. So what is going to happen to these programmers in these IT companies, whether they end up using it, whether the companies are looking at that very seriously or not, where the data is going to come from, how the programmers are approaching it. So that is looking at a particular technology. So are the digital platforms, including looking at gig economy platforms. Third one is immersive virtual reality, things like Meta, how it is being used by individuals, organizations, and the government, how the government is looking at. Digital public infrastructure is another nice area to work on. Things like unified payment interface, or looking at things like ONDC, Open Network Digital Platform for Commerce, which is being touted as a replacement for Amazon or the competitor to Amazon. It's a public infrastructure, digital public infrastructure, and who owns it, how do people use it, how the incumbent companies are responding to it. This can be another area to look at. So if I were to look at this, say, to begin with, looking at these 4 major areas of work in terms of technologies, I have an option of looking from multiple perspectives. So if I'm coming from a philosophy or a literature background, I'm look at how the NLP is being, which NLP is being part of generative AI, how NLP is being used for text formulation. So what is the different kinds of new forms of content writing emerges, all these things I can look at it. If you're from the social sciences, either a sociological or a psychological perspective, looking at things related to generative AI. And next is looking at conventional methods. If I were to look at it, whether I'm going to do interviews or a narrative analysis or looking at survey method, or I'm looking at some kind of big data driven. I work with computer science people to scrap larger amount of data. Or what Professor Julian was talking about in terms of you ask the users to install an application in their browsers, so that whenever somebody is opening a Facebook, they're able to understand what is the advertisements that are being shown. right? We are talking about working with computer scientists to do this, right? So, or you are looking at larger volume of the data to make certain assumptions or to produce certain insights. That is another way of looking at it. So, irrespective of the discipline, what you are really coming from, what this particular matrix helps us in doing is, I pick up a particular technology. I need to understand what is the issue I'm really interested in. I'm looking for a collaborator. If the collaborator coming from a different discipline is well and good. So we are bringing in complementary assets to the project. We come together and we do this. So these are the possibilities that we can do in terms of collaborative research. For instance, we looked at gig economy platform workers. We tried getting money from Unnati. Some of it didn't work out. Looking at nature of the gig workers who are using these digital platforms in India, Australia are completely different. When we look at Australia, there are a lot of migrant Bangladeshi women are using these platforms to provide this beauty services. Whereas in India, it is typically done by the migrant workers in the city. So in the internally migrated people using digital platforms, how they are using is completely different from Australian case. So these are the questions we can think of exploring it as a part of the collaborative research. India being a very diverse country, the insights that are being generated out of this research projects will be useful for both the countries. And Australia is slightly advanced in terms of technology, but the nature of adoption and the impact is really, really wide and diverse in the Indian context. And we have a lot more things to give and take. So with this, I'll stop. And the floor is open for discussions. And if you are able to come up with some possible topics for collaborative research, we can start exploring it here itself. Thank you.
I can see that we've reached 3 o'clock. And so I should just very quickly open this session. I'd like to introduce Professor Rangan again, who's going to be introducing some of the projects, some of the collaborative projects that have just begun. So it's just kind of new collaborations that have begun in the last year as part of the Unati scheme. And then we're going to hear from those researchers about some of the great work that they're doing.
Thank you, Adrian, and I'm glad to be back. I'm Priya Rangan, Principal Consultant at the Australia-India Institute, in charge of all the government projects, the research projects we do for the government. I'm very pleased to be moderating this session, where we'll be able to hear from some of the recipients of the Unnati Research Collaboration Grants, the Australia-India Research Collaboration Grants. I'd like to share a little bit of background about the Unnati grants. Following on from the thematics, the themes, the interdisciplinary themes that we outlined earlier that were raised in the Australia-India Education Council in 2019, the Australia-India Institute kind of put forward the suggestion to the Department of Education that we should actually try and initiate a small, research collaboration grant scheme that would enable people it would draw attention to these thematics that had been highlighted by the two governments, the ministers, and that we put it out there. It's a very small grant, but it would attract interest and get some work going, and then the department could see how it was proceeding and pursue decision making afterwards, following that little sort of pilot. So the pilot, as some of you will know, was introduced earlier this year. It was very short turnaround period. It was introduced in April. By end of May, beginning of June, I think we had made a decision. There was a huge amount of interest in the collaboration grants, and the amount was not much. It was only 30,000 Australian dollars for a short period for Australian researchers to partner with their Indian counterparts who were affiliated with higher education institutions or research centers or industry. And there were only 12 grants available of 30,000 each. And I cannot remember, and perhaps Reena can correct me, but we had an enormous amount of applications for each of the 4 areas we had identified: food, water, and soil, food security, soil and water, the digital humanities and intelligent futures, the future of health, and energy, environmental change and energy frontiers. It was just extraordinary. So on the one hand, we were quite daunted by the volume of applications and how, you know, the decision makers, the panels had to make. We had panel members from India, Australia, and the chairs, and they had to go through a lot of applications to reduce them to just 3 people, 3 3 awardees. And it was really, I mean, I did not envy their work. It was really hard. But they awarded it to some of the best projects that they thought would be able to deliver some outcomes within the time frame that the department had provided. So we are looking forward to these projects and the outcomes, and using them and presenting them to the Department of Education, and hopefully using it as a basis to encourage the department to consider funding other kinds of research collaboration activities in these sorts of emerging interdisciplinary areas. So the successful recipients are working with their Indian counterparts on, one is on a digital map designed for women's safety. Another one is about tackling fluoride pollution groundwater, tests to support gut health, all sorts of these sorts of projects. But in the digital area, we're going to hear from the 3 awardees. The first awardee is Dr. Kamaljit Sandhu. He's a senior lecturer at the University of New England Business School. He does research in cybersecurity, financial, fintech, blockchain, AI, etc. Lots of things. But in his case, he has been unable to actually participate and present directly, and he has sent a link to his presentation, which Reena will be putting up in the chat and also elsewhere, so that you can access that link and listen to the and listen to the presentation and watch the presentation. So we're going to go straight on to the other 2 who are going to be presenting, and that first is Dr. Sandeep Kumar, who's an associate professor at Manipal School of Architecture and Planning in Manipal, which is in the state of Karnataka. He has been with the Manipal School of Architecture and Planning since 2015, and he's the coordinator for training and placement, in addition to his teaching responsibilities. He's also a registered architect and city planner, and holds his Bachelor of Architecture from the NIT, the National Institute of Technology, Calicut, and a Master of City Planning from the IIT Kharagpur. His research includes urban design planning, safety and accessibility in urban areas, and inclusive cities. Our other speaker, awardee, is Dr. Mitchell Harrop. He has a PhD from the Department of Computing and Information Systems at the University of Melbourne, and he's a research fellow in the School of Historical and Philosophical Studies. He's currently working on the TLCmap.org, a national digital research platform for mapping history and culture. So I thank you for your participation and pass it on to perhaps Sandeep, who can start his presentation. Thank you. We will have the two presentations and then we'll follow up with questions and answers. Thank you. Over to you, Sandeep.
Very good morning to all of you. Am I audible, madam? Thank you, Priya, madam. And thank you, Adrian, for introducing me in the beginning also. And very good morning, everyone. I'll right away start with the presentation. Let me share the screen. Is my screen visible? Okay, so the project, what we are working is on women's safety and security in public areas. And we're going to use a crowdsourced data, and towards the end, we're trying to develop a mobile app. In this project, we have the principal investigator, Dr. Brian D. He's from UNSW, associate professor, and he is a city planner and mostly is into transport planning. And myself, I'm Sandeep, I'm a co-PI, architect and city planner. And the third partner is Dr. Anup Shukla. He's a GIS expert. He's one of our co-PI and is my colleague here. And let me quickly give you an overview of what we're going to present. We are going to talk about the current project and how this is based on the previous projects, a similar one, what we had worked on, and the current updates, what we are going right now, and the 3 bilateral collaborations, how 3 of us are our expertise and future directions. So the current project is on women's safety. That is, we are going to understand the women's safety in Udupi, especially in Udupi context, Udupi district. That is because based on a literature study, we have understood how this women's safety is getting impacted through various studies. Our major source of data was through census as well as through police records and HDI report that was available. So through that, we have shortlisted some of the areas in Udupi, and that has come down to certain wards, because in India, we have the planning distribution is city and state and districts and for the taluks, and then you have gram panchayats. This is how the segregation of areas are. Now this has come down to 3 wards and village areas here. That has now led down to identification of few spots. Now that categorization has come like in Udupi itself, we have come distributed in 3 identified areas. That is religious area that is near temple, and 1 recreation area that is near a lake, and a commercial zone. In these 3 areas, we would want to identify and understand what is the perception of women for their safety to access these areas, and what are the limitations that they would come across. So for this, we have targeted an age group of 18 to 45, particularly women itself. And we have prepared a 20-minute questionnaire, and we have identified 2 volunteers who would go to these places and study this. Now, this could be based on various factors that I'll be explaining in further slides. Previous to this, we had done a similar project, that is to identify, understand what is their mobility pattern. Where are these women traveling to, be it for religious, recreation, or shopping, or to purchase, or to work. Then we have come up with a desired route diagram from where to where, and that has led us to some insights. What is the desired routes where they were going, and how was their mode of transport, whether they were using their own vehicle or public transport, or whether traveling alone or with a companion. Now, this is further extension of that, because in the previous one, we didn't identify what was the built environment, like what are the factors that has led to it in physical environment. Now, this is a study that is the next level to it. So in this, we are trying to understand what are the physically built factors that I'll be explaining in the next slide, and that would cause as a limitation, and what are the best things that are making them to take a step forward and come up to the gender equality. Now, based on the current literature, I had already explained. So in these three areas, what we have done is we have identified few volunteers, and these volunteers we have trained here on how to conduct this survey. So just yesterday only we had winded up one pilot survey where we had asked the volunteers to do a pilot study, collect at least 3 samples from each of the sites, and to come back to us and tell us what problems they had come across in getting the data, because uh, mostly coming across women who are entrepreneurs or who would be using the areas in night times is less. So we had to come up with understanding whether they'll be able to answer, are they comfortable in answering? Because the moment someone approaches you with a questionnaire or something, people take a step back thinking that, what do you want? Why are you asking this? Are you from government? Are you from some agency? This is a major problem. They might not open up. There might be the reasons where they would want to put it across, but not a right platform they would become across. So this initial pilot study was to understand the difficulties and strategies to make sure we get all the surveys completed and serve back to them, and to also to let it know the public policy makers and also the urban city and urban planning designing how well the city can be designed so that they can use these public spaces without any problem, right? At a judiciary level and at moral level, you have police and other personnel who are available to give you safety. You have CCTVs to take care of that. But what's imprinted on your mind cannot be taken care of. Now we are trying to understand what is the reasons that would be affecting you. So based on a pilot study, what we have understood yesterday is most of the entrepreneurs or the daytime users have answered all our questions without any hesitation. Now we are yet to do the nighttime study, the pilot study that is scheduled for today, right? Starting from 7 to 8:30, that we have to be there and ask them. Mostly we are targeting the religious area. So we need to make sure they spare us some time because they are so involved in religious activities, they might not be willing to. The next thing that would also act as a hindrance is a local language. So for that, our volunteers we have identified is those who could speak and understand the local language. Now, the volunteers we have chosen are our own fifth year students. We have recently completed one urban context studio where they had understanding about Udupi overall as a context. Now, for this, sorry. Now, what we are looking at is what are the aspects that would prevent the women from accessing the areas. Now, I had categorized as two major aspects. One is on-street aspects and one is off-street. Under the on-street, we have built environment, that is whether it's the building, the compound walls, or the compound walls with which are high built compound walls, or with just trees or trees, how or just the barbed wires that would prevent visibility onto the streets. Then on-street elements, it could be the bushes which are not trimmed, right, or litter on the streets, or any visual obstructions such as billboards or advertisements that are typical part of our streets, what we come across in class 2, 3, 4 tier cities, not metros and the others, but the other cities. That would become a major hindrance. So that would allow people not to make use of these spaces dedicated for them, but then use of the other activities. Then illegal activities may be abandoned, unused buildings or unfenced plots where people might use them to do illegal activities or maybe to have some drinks or pass on comments or hide anything. Then the next aspect is a vehicular conflict. On site, as you could see in some of these photographs, there is no designated footpath. Even if it is occupied by the billboards or these electrical lines on the right hand side. If you left hand side, if you could see, there is a chaos. There is no organized way. Now, because of that, pedestrians might compromise on the footpath that is dedicated for them and end up walking on the road. So that brings in a huge conflict between vehicle and human. That needs to be taken care of because those are the major number of accidents that have been reported during the daytime, and obviously over the night time there is a lack of sense of security. So the women especially would prevent or avoid going out in the night post sunset. Now, under offset category, we have identified three parameters, that is culture and lifestyle, religion and superstition, role of media and social website platforms. Now, with internet easily being available, people could easily just spread rumors about any and everything without understanding the authenticity of the information they have come across. It's just you take it, save it, and just forward it in the different groups that you might be. And that creates a lot of havoc, and that actually impacts on people thinking, is this really happening? How is this happening? Why is this happening? And without understanding authenticity, people try to react and become violent, or they might even go back to cocoon because they might not want to come across those situations and stay back indoors. And religion and superstition. Now, in India, we have many religions, and religions play an important role, especially when women have to go out at what time, or what is the limited activities they are exposed to, unless they are working women. Even for working women, we have some hindrances here. They exist, but unfortunately, people do not voice it out. It is just absorbed, and they just go with the life how it happens. Now, then the next is the culture and lifestyle. If you come across, again, there are many societies or cities itself, you could see they become mostly male dominant societies post sunset. Women do not come out, or even if they go out, they some misconceptions would like it's a bad omen for women to go out post sunset or going alone. Or if they go alone, there would be any kind of bad remark that would be kept as to a certain person. The community bonding plays a greater role here, and community identity, because you cannot be an independent. We are highly an interdependent community here. Somehow the validation of others becomes an important aspect in our lifestyle. Unless they validate, we are not good. Unless they say this person is good, we don't feel. Even you feel that you are a good person, but you need the validation of the others, and somehow that has been ingrained into independent mind, and that is playing a crucial role in gender equality. Now, this study of ours highlights two important sustainable goals. That is number 5, which is gender equality, and number 11, that is sustainable cities and communities. So, but these are the 3 sites what we have identified in Manipal and Udupi. One is the commercial zone, that is in the Manipal Tiger Circle Junction. The other one is a recreational zone, that is from the junction to the lake entrance, that is a lake area. And the other third one is a temple zone. If just give me 2 minutes, if I'll just take you to this area quickly. So this is the area that takes to the lake. This is how the surrounding looks like. Now this, in this road, if you go towards the city, and this road takes you to the lake. This zone is a medium scale industrial zone. Mostly it's the laborers or below poverty line kind of people who stay on this side. So it becomes a kind of stigma that this area is highly unsafe and people avoid this. So if you look at this landscape and the streets here, how this becomes, because if anything happens here, people coming to save you or responding to you is a bit difficult. Look at this landscape around. The lights and the street lights, it's a least occupied zone. Then this is the commercial circle, the city area in Manipal town. This is the main spine, this is the national highway. It's a busy area, but still post 10 or 11, it becomes again mostly male dominated. This is a highway that where we keep going. You have on the one left hand side, you have hospital zone, and on the right hand side, it's a commercial space. But still, people find it a little difficult to fully access this area. Whereas in Udupi district, the Manipal town is considered as one of the safest places. These are the characteristics of the surroundings. And this is the temple complex parking, where people have said that this is one of the areas, potential areas where people, women especially, they feel unsafe. A high compound wall and a lot of parking spaces. After sunset, again, this becomes a complete isolated area. Other than the pilgrims or the religion people who had come to visit the temple. And there are a lot of hawkers. Daytime, absolutely, you don't have much of issues. Getting back to this is the aspect what we are trying to study on this. How women perceive their safety, whether it is induced because of media or induced because of incidents happening in and around, and then tell them don't go out, or is it because of culture or religion, or if not this, is it contextual based? Is it because of the windows or people not coming to help you when you are in need of it? This has to be mapped. So we are just like how I have shown the geotags of the locations. We'll be using the geotags where women, especially, they talk about this area, this particular zone. I feel unsafe to use in certain times of the day or night because of these factors. So we are planning to map it online, and then we are trying that will help us in designing better cities and in better urban design. In fact, you could say, if you bring it down to micro level, it's architectural design. At a larger scale, it is going to be urban design and city design, and that will also help us in framing better policies. Especially when I say policies, it could be in terms of talking about the road width and pedestrian footpath, at what heights the light should be placed, at what how could, if in case of emergency distress, if you need to have emergency numbers or a button, how that could be ingrained into the city the street design itself. That's how we're planning to bring it to AI and a mobile app where people can update contextual based that, and this is a safe area, this is unsafe area in a real time scenario, so that it would be better for design architects, urban planners, and policymakers to consider these points when they are coming in through city planning guidelines. So this is about our project. Thank you. And this could include about city planning, right? Architecture and urban design also. We have GIS expertise coming in through. This also helps us in understanding the mobility needs of women. One quick highlight I would like to bring is recently after the Karnataka elections, the Karnataka state elections, they had the government had come up with a free bus ride to women. Because of that, there was a tremendous increase in women opting to travel across. Earlier, women, uh, as per seat, didn't have sufficient money to travel to places, or were feeling uncomfortable or not safe to use different modes of transport. Because of that, now because this Karnataka government has introduced free bus travel to women, they just started traveling everywhere. There is a huge demand, and they are not finding time, not finding space. They are just out, they are enjoying their time. It's really good to see at the same time, like how they have been holding themselves all these years. And now there is an opportunity to explore. They are enjoying it. And one more thing is the Karnataka government has also introduced another scheme, Gruha Lakshmi. Gruha means house, Lakshmi is money. So they have introduced 2,000 rupees monthly to the women who are under the below poverty line and economic weaker sections. So that could give them the money power to purchase or to come up with their needs. Otherwise, you are dependable on other sources of income or maybe no income, which might actually limit your freedom even in terms of movement or purchasing things. So these are the few aspects that we will also look into in our study, and we will be more happy if if anyone is interested to join us on this in the later skills, because this we would like to introduce or in other cities and towns to do a similar projects. Thank you
Thank
all.
you much, Sandeep. Thank you for an excellent update of your project and where you're at and all the interesting findings. We'll get to questions, answers later, but I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Harap, who is going to talk about their project. So over to you.
Oh, thank you. I'll just do the screen share. Right. So as mentioned, Dr. Mitchell Harrop from the University of Melbourne, a strange person who is both a computer scientist and a honorary historian. But that's a complicated story about how that came about. I'm going to be talking to you today about an urban history kind of project, mapping digital Shillong, and unfortunately, Professor Andy May couldn't be here today because he is either on the plane or just getting off the plane to do the visit that's associated with this project. So I've come along to do this this presentation. So I'll be talking more about the technical side of the project, but do my best to explain the actual the meat of the project. We've got a big cast of characters from different institutions, which causes its own challenges, and also outside of academia, so documentary makers and so on. So the previous research project that this came out of was a project by Andy May with. Oh, sorry. Sorry. This I'll start with this research project. So we're basically trying to make a local sort of encyclopedia for Geelong, and we've previously made a local encyclopedia for Melbourne. So we want to do this kind of project again, but with more community contribution, right? And source stories about local history from locals, amateur historians as well as professional historians, deal with the issues of distributed authorship and contested stories to put up online to be a useful understanding of place. So that's the project in broad strokes. We've also done this sort of community contribution before at the start of COVID with some colleagues over in the United States who very quickly put together an Ameka site to collect information about people's experiences of COVID and going into lockdown, and try to collect things as they were happening. And so we did the Australian branch of that, and I in particular worked on getting a lot of the mapping features working and being able to easily get people to put pins on maps and tell their stories and upload their photographs of things as they were happening. I'm also working on at the moment another project, again tangential to this, but it has a strong mapping component, so we'll be able to reuse some of the lessons from that. tlcmap.org. So this is a now series of Australian Research Council grants for, and I'm struggling to remember the acronym for LEAF, linkage, infrastructure, other things, if anyone can help me out. But national infrastructure for doing mapping that we've been working on for a few years now. The main interesting part of this is the Gazetteer of Australian Place Names. So not necessarily just places that you would find on Google Maps, so the names of restaurants and so on, but things like Makeout Point, that the locals knew that particular lake or whatever by this particular name from this time period to that time period, or older names for things. So in Melbourne, I'm old enough to still call it Spencer Street Station, but I should be calling it Southern Cross Station, and recording when that name change happened and why people my age and older will still refer to it by its old name. Having that as a database that is searchable and helps you be able to put things maps, not just relying on Google, but also a platform of metrics and so on. So you're working on these different kind of threads of projects that have come together for this. Previous to the funding that directly leads to the Humanities scheme was Andy's project from the British Library. So the British Library had a funding scheme for endangered archives projects, which hit COVID lockdowns. So it was about digitizing and recording things, oral histories, etc., from the Khasi Hills. Not being able to leave his own city kind of impacted that a little bit for Andy. So this project is a sort of successor of that a lot of the materials that this project was able to gather is things that will also go up onto the our online encyclopedia. There was also a visiting fellowship that led to this. Yeah, so and I think that some of the frustrations of this and trying to work in official archives also lends itself to why we're doing the more crowdsourcing aspect of this and asking locals for their stories and contributions. So we've been collecting a lot of information. We've been getting information out of the Thacker directories, so street directories of the area, and mapping those and getting a system up for handling the mapping and overlay of historical maps over each other and over the top of contemporary maps. And we're sort of moving into the augmentation phase where we have the raw materials and we want to link them together and say this is the same thing, and layer the information. And our user testing is sort of ongoing because we've got this crowdsourced kind of contribution thing. We've done our soft launch of that and learned a lot of lessons about making sure that it's all very mobile accessible and having two different streams of the community contributions to our encyclopedia. So having just a very simple upload a picture, tell us about it, or put a pin on a map and tell us about it, versus the more advanced contribution of give us lots of information and pinpoint everything and tell us everything about you and your story. So that'll be ongoing sort of refinement. So I mentioned doing things with old maps, right? Old maps are not necessarily 100% to scale, and a lot more. That happens a lot more than you would think. So you get things like global maps where Europe is larger than it actually is, so that one, colonialism, but two, being able to actually read all the European countries, right? So you even get that sort of thing happening in local maps, right? Of the detail of the central business district being a little bit larger, and perhaps the fringe areas or forest being squished up a little bit in the map. So we've been doing work to geo-rectify the maps, which is the process of rubber sheeting. So you find and you do the history work to work out what are places on an old map that are still there or in a known location at some point, and get an even spread of that so you can stretch and shrink the map for eventually being able to put the historical maps all on top of each other and do that sort of swipe visualization of show and hide the contemporary thing so that people can see things. So we've done a lot of that work. Beyond just the liberties that are taken with those who are creating the maps. So even when you have something very official done by surveyors who really, really care about things, you still get warping in the actual document itself and creases and so on that you can iron out digitally. We've also done this sort of work before with Melbourne. So an extreme example here with the with the public transport, where public transport maps are not drawn to scale. They're drawn so that stations are equally spaced out. But we've taken old contour maps of Melbourne and put them over, and just with some 3D buildings for fun, to see how the landscape of Melbourne has changed over time, and why it all used to flood down to Elizabeth Street. So applying those sort of lessons that we learned through doing that again, we've also had parallels with our sort of primary sources from directories. So there's Thacker's Indian directories, which are sort of, and Melbourne's SANS and later SANS and McDougall directories, which are your phone book precursors. So no phone numbers in them, but still that street by street, place by place, who was where, and what was going on there. And we're sort of using this as our scaffolding for the encyclopedia entries. So before we start getting the stories from people from the community and oral history stuff and all that sort of interesting stuff, we want to have the scaffolding there from the directories to be like, at least we can say some things about each particular place and each particular road, and then build up from there. So it isn't a sort of ghost town, an online ghost town, as opposed to the very busy actual town. So again, reusing our lessons in that sort of information extraction from directories, and using the, what subtle indents in the being mean, and being able to train up that. So that sort of all leads into this point about it's sort of parallel projects that we've got a lot of people who are interested in local history, urban history, right? And it's the same project in a different location and wanting to use the same sort of processes and doing the same sort of thing, right? That we have, Encyclopedia of Melbourne, and now our lovely Mecca site, the Geelong Digital Archives directory. So it's all sort of the small projects that build on each other and come together, and that's the sort of mentality that we use. We're very much prototypers, right? What's the little small thing that we can do and achieve that will help out all of the projects, right? That, okay, now we've got our nice just drop a pin interface for contributing, so we can use that again for when we do something different with eMelbourne or with another city somewhere. Cool. In terms of bilateral collaborations and partnerships, I can't really speak to the part of the project of like, how do we get the funds to our Indian collaborators to do this part of the on the ground sort of research, and the Henry has largely been dealing with that. But I can say that it'll definitely be easier for the next person that tries to do the same sort of thing. I can speak a bit to the technology part of it, right? And that collaborations within institutions are easy because this university has a SharePoint site that we've all got logins to. Collaborations across universities are a bit harder. You can use the national infrastructure that sometimes works and sometimes disappears. Collaborations across institutions is harder still, and especially they'll have a separate, not unified education login or just their Gmail account or so on. And then collaborations across institutions across countries is harder still. So we've very much been sort of push towards using a hodgepodge of different third-party platforms, right, that everyone can sign up for and get an account on, and learn a bunch of lessons there. Future directions, we're going to keep building. We want to get more contributions, and then when we sort of have the peak level contributions, we've then got it all set up to pull out that lovely linked open data and make the aforementioned mapping interface of it. Also apply our fancy AI techniques to the natural language kind of contributions and mapping information coming out of plain language, so named entity recognition, etc. So getting that up as a prototype fairly soon, and then thinking about, you know, extending this to any place, and sharing the lessons between different projects.
Thanks.
So I think I'll stop there. Yep.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Mitchell. That's so rich, and it's so exciting that you're doing this work. As someone who does this sort of work as a geographer, environmental historian, it's absolutely, you know, wonderful. And I can see one of the attendees is called, you know, said it's pure gold for human geographers, and it's absolutely right. I think we'll open it up to some questions. I'm going to start with Sandeep. There was a question for you, which said, and it's a good point. There are two questions here. One is about whether the app will change the stereotypes or the cultural barriers that hugely impact women's safety. It's a good question because I think Aparna's touched on something that is very critical in that context. You know, whether that map is going to be effective. And secondly, the question that Adrian has asked, which is about whether the mapping of those areas that are identified as unsafe be reinforced as such, so that you know, it becomes a no-go zone, or will it change? So could you just answer those questions, and then we'll go on to Mitchell.
Sure, ma'am. First, to the question raised by Aparna. Now, this is one thing what we are looking at, because in our survey, we had left one open-ended question. What would you like to tell us about any kind of change you would want to make the space more accessible? So we are asking from them itself, like, what more can we do, be the policy or the judicial level or the local community level itself, how this can be improved. So we are awaiting. Once the questionnaire is ready, I think probably then we can deduce, because cultural barrier is something which is very difficult. Now, we are looking at the generation change also. The current generation has a different perspective altogether. Now, the age group, if you look at the age sex pyramid of Udupi, the elderly population is at a lesser end. So that means we are looking at the people with that kind of mindset, where cultural values are very strong, right? It's very less. Now, looking at the generations change and the mindset that has changed, I'm sure they would be opening up to a broader perspective. That's why we see more women coming up for employment and easily able to move. Right. So regarding to the social barrier, as I said, there was already this incentive, the Karnataka government that has put up that 2,000 rupees per month to the BPL and EWS sections. They have promised it so, but I think that's more going like a political gimmick, because recently one of my friend has said that they didn't get, their mother didn't receive the 2,000 rupees after the second month. They are still waiting for the bank amount to be included in the bank. That didn't turn up. They're not getting any response from the authorities either, like when that they got it, or will it be given or not. Now, there is a problem that when the politicians make these promises in terms of development, it just goes for a month or two and then it dies off. And just before the onset of next elections, they come up with new set of regulations. As long as these interventions are there, I think the interventions by these politicians for their own benefits, that's going to be a problem. But social aspect, yeah, that can be looked at. The cultural wise is something they themselves should be able to answer what could be a solution, right? And the question from Adrian, yeah, it is mostly the app is mostly aimed to identify the areas, and the intention is to again connect it with the local authorities, especially the police. Now there's a police patrolling time, the timings at which they go on patrolling. If this particular incident that has taken place, because they are supposed to tag in the real time, so there will be a sequence or a pattern what we can observe. The incidents happen in specific times. So there can be the police department can be roped in. Then they can change the patrolling times or increase the patrolling time and interventions. That is from the police side, what we can get help from. But towards for the architects and city planners or to the municipality, they can install better lighting systems, CCTVs, and bring in community awareness. Because from again, this one line answer is to both of you based on our previous project, where they said that the community feeling is very important for women's safety. They are more comfortable in going into the areas and streets where they know the people they are from, they are familiar with. They know that even if there is a small voice also of any kind of unsafe incident, they will get a help. May not be from police, but from the localites who would immediately recognize. And that kind of confidence to boost in the community of familiarity could be brought in through more activities and women involvement. Already there are a lot of festivals. When we track the festivals also, there are people who actively participate in it. Now, there are only few areas where they are not venturing into, like the areas where they have more pubs or bars, where you expect the, not so good people, sorry for that, but then, yeah, who are not well educated also, like they don't bother about rules and regulations of law. They avoid those kind of areas. That is where we would like to focus and make it safe and accessible too for everyone.
I mean, is there an argument for making the app publicly available, to women in the city so they can check on that map if they're going to an area about what's safe and what isn't, or is that problematic? I mean, should this data be publicly available to citizens as well as to municipal authorities and other authorities?
It would be good if it is made publicly available for two things. One is a cosmetic treatment. That is, the women, if they would want to use those areas, they would try to avoid or take necessary actions. Like if they would want a companion to take along with them, or inform someone that I'm going to this place for this thing. If if you don't hear it from me, in the meantime, you can just cross check at that. On the other hand, this app should also be made available or accessible to the local police, so that they can register the online complaints, because we need not always go to the police station to register a case, right? And though there are local helpline numbers to the police, the publicity is not everywhere. Not many feed that number in the mobile, or neither you do not come across any banner or a poster, a billboard which puts up, this is a local helpline number for the nearest police station, or nearest police station is at this distance. Those things are not publicized. Probably, I think through media, this should be encouraged. So the awareness should increase. That is the intention.
Just quick comment, which I would point out is that I think it would be worthwhile to think about. I mean, it's good that you've clarified how that app might be used in real time by the users who have smartphones and who download those apps, and then the police. That interface, it would be an interesting thing to actually look at. But from a feminist point of view, and I'm a feminist, I would say that the approach that you are putting forward for urban planning and is in some ways actually not necessarily making women feel like equal citizens and moving around equally, but more like making them more and more dependent on the male, on the kind of male structure, right? If you feel unsafe, you take a man with you. If you don't, if you're not recognized in certain areas, you don't go. I mean, but you could actually, but at the same time, you're also talking about social programs. I mean, it's a different matter what you raised in terms of whether or not somebody gets paid that 2,000 rupees every month, right? But the fact is that you also mentioned women are now moving freely on public transport because it's free. So one is not just the cost, but the safety of using the public transport. I don't know what Udupi would be like, but sometimes, if you're in a crowded public transport bus in New Delhi or some city like that, and you have men rubbing up against you in all sorts of ways, you don't really want to be on the bus. Whereas if you've got buses where women can travel without any worries, that's great. And that means that they have much more mobility at different times of day. So I think that there are two different things. I mean, as an urban designer, what you can propose is better lighting, better street crossings, or better points for women to stand or whatever at bus stands. But beyond that, I really think you need to think through what your app might be doing. But that's just a set of comments I have. I think I'm going to pass it on to the questions to Mitchell. And Mitchell, the question that that Adrian has put forward is, why did you choose Shillong? And not you, I guess it was Andy, but still.
Yeah. So I guess the obvious answer, the previous digital British Libraries grant was in the same area. One might then immediately ask, well, then what was the reason for that? And go back. So it is basically to do with Andy's previous research work in the area. I'd flip that around and go, we could also quite easily ask, why Melbourne? Right, the flip side of it, and that kind of highlights that it's a project about local history, about urban history, getting family historians involved, and stories of everyday life, as well as the bigger stories as well. But that there is a certain timelessness and interest in someone just going to the market and getting food, and what was that like, and sort of everyday stories and interest in that, and yeah, it could be anywhere, and hopefully we sort of get to that point, or at least can hand something over to someone else who wants to do their local town, and give them advice, and they can take lessons from our sort of two places that we've now done.
I mean, I was just thinking, because Shillong was such an important town in the old map of Assam, and therefore things like Dhaka's directory, the amount of historical material available probably gives you much finer data than it would for some other places in the hill country, so that in the Khasi Hills. So that's a kind of well-documented place you can therefore track over time, and it's a kind of manageable size, as opposed to one of the big cities. So I just wondered if it was because you have that kind of depth of records there that makes this approach really kind of begs for those records being made accessible in a visual sort of way. The archive is driving it, or whether it's just a particular interest in the the changing urbanisms of the hill country particularly.
Yeah, so this is kind of where we're getting to a part where I can't really speak to these parts of the project, but I know that there's definitely talk about, okay, well, where do we sort of draw the line that is a manageable project that, because as mentioned earlier, IT projects fail, and what's the chewable size, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there was also a question about the sustainability plans for the project. I'm always sort of inclined to say it all goes away if you don't keep giving us money, because maybe people who give money are in the room. So there's actually different aspects of the sustainability. We've got local archivists involved in the project, so there is, and the license that by which people contribute things, we've explicitly said, and we may at some point in the future give this to a reputable archive such as this place, and this place. So there's that aspect of it. There's the sustainability of the contribution interface, right? Which is probably the least sustainable aspect of it. In terms of like, okay, here's the survey that people can go to and can contribute. It'll be around for a few years, but I wouldn't say it would be around in 10, based on what we're running it off. But then again, are people still going to be actively running the project, on that in 10 years? Probably not. There'll probably be something else that can be used, and they can just sort of reuse the questions in our approach, and how we sort of went about getting responses. And then there's also the technical aspect of the sustainability of machine readable data, right? So there's the archive question, but then there is the online machine readable aspect that I concern myself with, and we sort of know which university systems are going to be around for a while that will associate things with a DOI, and what open data formats will be around, and we quietly take a copy of those regularly, to make sure that exists long term. Yeah, so I think that sort of covers most of the sustainability. But also, please give us more money. Whoever has money.
Well, I think that this is a good moment for me to stop and say thank you for your excellent presentations and your ongoing work. Wish you the very best for continuing it and building on it. I have a lot of questions also, which I can ask later on with Mitchell about archiving is one thing, data integration, and for constructing some sort of stories, because you can have lots of data but no story which can trace change, landscape change or something. But those are not things that we should burden the rest of the people with, and we can have an independent conversation. So I will hand it back over to Adrian, and thank you both for excellent presentations. Thank you. And to everyone else. Adrian, over to you.
Thank you, Professor. So that was really interesting to have the two comparable projects on digital urbanism, thinking about the shaping the future environment, thinking about the historical environment, how those two connect. And it did make me think, of course, last night I was watching Tagore, so I was thinking about all these debates were happening about where you can and can't go in the 19th century. So no doubt back in that historical map of Shillong, people were also kind of thinking their way around how we kind of contest urban terrains. But it's a very important topic, and I think it is something that really is actually quite rich in thinking about comparison and collaborations with Australia, because of course our cities face similar issues. There's also kind of questions around kind of mobility. There are questions around safety. We have a kind of high degree of car dependency, which creates significant problems that is having to be kind of thought about by planners for the future. you know, the geographies are not necessarily amenable to large scale quick transport solutions. People have lost the sense in many ways of sharing those public spaces as a normative thing over the last few generations, but we know that it's coming back realistically, environmentally, thinking forward. So it's quite interesting to think how perhaps our planning and environment in India and Australia kind of can speak to each other. And that's not just because some of those kind of shared colonial blueprints, which of course Mitchell drew attention to, in terms of how some of those original environments were kind of planned out on the basis of the assumptions of the day. So I think we are just slightly over time, and the only reason I want to leave is because I know that we're back tomorrow, and I hope that some of you are able to join us again for the second day. And I just want to give that a brief introduction. So you know, we started with a big bang today with the ADMS Centre, but we're also very fortunate tomorrow that we're going to have Professor Preeti Mudaliar from IIT Bangalore, who's going to come in and talk about bodies, biometric duties, children in the welfare state. So a whole kind of complex issues around the kind of social domain of datification that will certainly be relevant. We heard from the Centre for the Digital Child this morning in Australia. Definitely this is an area for collaboration. We're also going to follow that, you know, with Professor Patterson, who's director for the Centre for AI and Digital Ethics, which was one of the questions that came up today. Jeannie will be able to take us through exactly what's happening in that space in Australia. So I hope that would then be of interest and use to people in India. So that's our kind of opening session. And not just that, but we also have my good friend, Professor Ian Hall from the Asia Institute, who's going to run a discussion where he's going to talk about, you know, some of the organizations, some of the channels and mechanisms through which kind of collaboration between the two countries operates, what the scheme is running at the moment. And we can think about the things that we don't have and might need, as well as what we do have. So thinking about the kind of some of the doors that open beside the ones that Priya has very kindly opened for some of us this year. So that's just the morning session, and then we'll be back to IIT Delhi once more in what will be our afternoon, to hear from the Technology and Society cluster about some projects that are going on there, so we can think about sort of thinking of the project kind of level and sharing of knowledge. So, you know, day two is going to be just as good as day one, and I realize everyone is very busy with their weekly academic schedule, but I hope you can come back and join us tomorrow for some of that. It'd be great to see you there. But thank you so much, all of you, for making today such a rich and illuminating discussion.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good day, everyone.
Thank you, folks. Bye.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.